Thank you. You're all my children now.
You're my children now.
Robert, welcome to Belgium again. Again. You've been here a couple of times already.
Well, I was trying to remember my favorite restaurant, which I think at one time had been a pharmacy in downtown, Old Town Brussels.
Quick.
It's wonderful. They have a big oyster bar and a big clock, but it looks like it's that Belgian Art Nouveau style that looks like the Nautilus, the submarine in Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. It's that style, that architectural style. It's so
retro,
cool.
futuristic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, good, very good.
Thank you.
I'm going to use that.
Okay. Well, actually, I wanted to talk about your career a little bit before Freddie, because what's really amazing about this, you come up, right? You start in the theater, before doing film, and you come up along with the new Hollywood, Scorsese, Lucas, Spielberg, all those people, Coppola, and you come up with them, and do you feel then, because you meet them when they're young and they're still aspiring directors, or maybe not aspiring, but they want to make their second, maybe their third film.
Well, I was,
So how did it feel to be at that particular?
I wasn't the sort of East Coast thing. I worked with some of them. I worked with John Milius on Big Wednesday, and John Milius also wrote the famous scene in Jaws, where Robert Shaw talks about the sharks eating all of the American sailors on the sinking aircraft carrier during World War II. That famous monologue.
Very theatrical, actually.
And that's John Milius's style. So I worked with John, and then I worked with Bob Rafelson, who discovered Jack Nicholson.
Okay.
And got him an Oscar for 5 Easy Pieces. And so that was sort of my relationship back then. But I was just dealing, with being the journeyman actor in Hollywood and going out, a couple of times a week and auditioning. And it's weird, there's things you forget. I remember they tried to write a part for me on Kojak, the famous detective series. And like an Irish informer, that lived on the streets of New York and would, tell Kojak when the crime was going to be committed or a bank robbery he heard about. And then that's how Kojak kept me out of jail. But it didn't happen. But I remember that was like so intense. And then I went on my first movie audition and I got the part. And that was Buster and Billy. And that was a huge hit in America, although it was a regional hit, but it made a lot of money. And the director of that film, the whitest guy you've ever seen, Canadian, white hair, white skin, light blue eyes, but he directed the original version of Raisin in the Sun, the great film that made Sidney Poitier a star.
All right, okay. So yeah, that's what I found so interesting and fascinating. You really came up with this big where this cinema is going. They're going to start making films differently. Basically, they invented the blockbuster with Jaws, and then you have all those people coming up. And you witnessing that? Could you feel it in your audition? They were looking for something else.
But it was hard to, sometimes it's hard not to be judgmental. We all grow up with certain, I don't want to say prejudices, but like things you think are cool or not cool, right? Just because you're a kid in school. And and I remember in California, the biggest sin would be to wear dark socks with sandals. Oh, you just didn't do that. It was so uncool. You don't wear socks with sandals. And I went to a party in Malibu. I was invited by Margot Kidder, right? Lois Lane from Superman, and the star of one of my favorite horror movies, Sisters, directed by Brian De Palma. And Margot invited me to this party in Malibu, and I went there, and I was in my surfboard shorts, and I was all tan and everything. And I remember being on the beach and meeting this guy in that ugly leather hippie hat, and he had on the whitest legs in the world, and he had socks on, black socks with sandals, and it was Martin Scorsese.
All right.
And I remember just thinking, who is this guy? What's he supposed to be? Why is he dressed that way? You know, because he like checked every box for something uncool, and yet he's the coolest guy in the world.
But did he already direct something at that point, or?
He hadn't directed Taxi Driver yet, which is his breakout.
Which is
the breakout film. He directed a couple of little independent films then. He might have directed Mean Streets at that point.
I would have to.
Yeah, with De Niro and Harvey Keitel.
That's amazing, I think. And then, in fact, I have a quote of you. I hope it's correct. You had a new scene with Susan Sarandon. You shot Burt Reynolds point blank. You worked with Henry Fonda. So you were kind of for a long time sidekick, happy support of all those big stars, and you really were there. You were making a good career for yourself. I think that's a really good thing.
I think for a long time I was typed as a Southerner. You know, I was one of the go-to Southerners, playing parts from the South in the United States.
Are you though? Are you?
No. It's weird. I never did it in the theater at all. Never played. You know, it just it's the way Hollywood sees you sometimes, and you have to learn to make peace with that. But which is why I never complained about being typed in horror, because I'd already been typed as a sidekick, the best friend. And the thing is, in the old days, back in the 30s and 40s and 50s, the sidekick was an older guy. It could be an older guy, like the famous American actors Arthur O'Connell or Walter Brennan or Ward Bond. You know, in all the John Ford movies, you could be the older guy, the sidekick, the buddy, the pal.
The mentor.
And then I was doing the young version of that, and I realized that I couldn't just keep doing it as I got older, because they started going younger again with the sidekicks, and that began with Rennie Santoni, who played Dirty Harry's partner, Clint Eastwood's partner, and then he gets killed, and it works so well because he's the young cop, the young detective. So that kind of changed, and I said, well, I'm not going to be able, because I could see myself as an old man, you know, playing the best friend to some big star, like, you know, that was younger than me. Like, I'll give you a couple of points here, Brad Pitt, here's what you ought to do. And I knew that wasn't going to happen for me. And then I got the horror movie and a science fiction project. And they gave me an international audience, which I'm so grateful for, because horror movies, fantasy films, science fiction films speak the international language of film. We all understand them. We can all go see an action movie with Jean-Claude Van Damme. We can all go see a Bruce Lee movie. We can all go see a horror movie or a science fiction movie. And even if it doesn't have subtitles, we can follow it. You can follow the fantasy movies too. Whereas if you gave us your best Belgian comic, and I'm sure there's some really funny Belgian actors, we don't get him. Just like you probably don't get some of our people. And that doesn't translate as well. But horror and science fiction opened the door for me internationally. I've worked 14 movies in Europe. You know, just in Europe alone, I've done 14 movies.
Can I just have a side note on what you just said, that everyone understands those horrors or those action films? We once had, at the BIF that we mentioned before, that you came to, directors from Uganda, I think it was Uganda, from Wakaliwood. And what you said, they watched all those action films, right, but without the sound, because it didn't speak English. And then when they tried to remake those films, they invented the most crazy stories, because also they were dubbing them live and reinventing the film because they were dubbing them live as well. And so they had a whole other mythology about Schwarzenegger and Stallone, which is really to your point of how those films can travel without even understanding what's going on. You know, it gave amazing results.
There's that heroic thing. I've worked all over the world, and I know that Gigi and Victor have the great booth back here with just some phenomenal posters. Everybody should stop by and look at some of the old classic Belgian posters that they have in one sheets. But I was in Africa doing a movie, and in Africa, when they get a movie in some states and countries in Africa, they show it to an artist. They show the movie. Let's say it's Predator. They show Predator to the guy once. He sees the movie once. He's got a beer. He watches the movie. Then they say, go home and do the poster. And he has to do it out of his memory. He doesn't have a bunch of photos and stills, because that's a little too fancy. They're not carrying the publicist on this, where they probably have one copy of the film and they're taking it to the various small towns and villages. But I've seen some of those posters for Predator and for Alien and for Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th. And they're so strange because it's the memory that the artist had of that 90 minutes dreaming along with that movie. And they're a little bit different. They're just a little bit different. Jason looks a little bit different. I remember seeing one where he was really big, like giant size. And then I remember seeing the Predator's not quite the same, the way the guy I met. But it's very cool, and I'm telling you, if you ever see any of these, grab them. If you're ever at a con and you see one, because I think they're going to be really valuable.
Let's go back to your most iconic character, Freddy Krueger, yes? Yeah. So you just said it really gave you an international recognition, Freddy Krueger, because I was wondering, some actors, I want to say like Englund, for instance, they would go like as sidekicks all their lives. They would be amazing. They would be such good actors. Like you are, also come from the theater, and they can really build their career for decades without ever making it to like as an A-lister. Now you get this part, which kind of also maybe pigeonholes you a little bit. Do you ever regret that you maybe didn't keep the other way?
It happened to me in my early 30s. If it happened to me in my early 20s, I might be a wreck right now. But what you guys have to understand is I had starred in 10 movies before I did Freddy. And like you mentioned, I'd starred with Henry Fonda, Jeff Bridges, Sally Field, so many wonderful actors and directors. I was already established. So when the Freddy thing really became obvious to me around part 2, I just relaxed and went with the flow. They say go with the flow. And that's what I did. I didn't fight it, because I had seen other actors that I really respected and knew. And there was a particular actress who had just left a really famous television show, and she hardly ever worked again. And it was just, I knew you don't want to make that mistake. There's a saying about being in a hit. I can't remember where I heard this. It may have been Mark Hamill heard it from Mel Brooks or something, but the line is, when you're on the merry-go-round, you never get off. Don't get off the merry-go-round until it stops.
No, I understand.
Yeah, when it's still turning, you stay on it, because you never know when it's going to happen for you again.
I think that's a smart idea, because sometimes I guess it's a little bit of the actor's ego that wants to show he can do loads of different things.
But I was lucky, because I had done serious theater and I'd done serious movies before Freddy. So, that took the pressure off, because otherwise, but if it would have happened when I was 22 or 23, I might have gone crazy. I might have really felt trapped.
Actually, let's talk about going with the flow, especially relating to Freddy's evolution throughout the movies. In the first movie, Wes Craven does with Freddy what my wife does with My Marriage, which is he's essential to the project, but let's keep him in the shadow and as a minimum presence as possible.
They also were afraid of the lighting, how to light me.
Oh, really?
And they were afraid of how to light the makeup, and what highlights would be exaggerated and bounce white. I have to be I've done the makeup once or twice at cons, and I always am Robert Englund in the makeup, and I always ask for a black box so they can light it theatrically, so the makeup doesn't look white, or
flat
too false. Yeah, with the fans. And so they were a little bit afraid of the makeup. And they, you know, I remember at one moment in the first week or so, they realized they had to light for me and let the beautiful Johnny Depp and the beautiful Heather Langenkamp step into my lighting, as opposed to having me step into the glamour lighting for Johnny Depp or for Heather, who didn't need it anyway, because then I would go too bright or too red. Yeah, it was a tricky thing, but they were, you know, nervous about that. So that's part of the reasons I'm in the shadows. So,
but it helps the character, though. It helps the fear, the scares. It helps the fear the character's instilling into the story. And later on, we will see him more. He will also, like, that's the evolution of a lot of those iconic monsters, is they become pop culture icons, so people are used to them, so they become sometimes more funny, but usually less scary, because basically we're used to them.
Freddie always, see, I never got into an argument with him because I loved him, but Wes Craven, if you watch the original, Wes Craven has a lot of dark humor and a lot of jokes for Freddie. You know, Freddie cuts his fingers off and makes a joke. Freddie takes Tina's face and wears it, you know, in a scene. He pulls nightmare tricks on people, you know, with their feet going through the stairs and stuff like that. So Freddie was always
Humorous.
You know, yeah, he always had a sense of humor, like a dark, vicious clown. But in classical theater, they call it, and in Roman times, they used to call it, it was an ingredient in all the storytelling. You know, you have the cranky old father, you know, you have the maid, the sexy maid, but you know, along with all of those, you had the cruel clown. And who did that evolve into? Here and in France, the harlequin. The harlequin. Harlequin is very cruel, and he plays a lot of jokes on the other people in the cast, in the stories.
You see, this is fascinating to me, because we had a couple of actors here where they asked the monster to be played by a stuntman because they wanted this physicality. You fill this one with your classical background and your acting methods, let's say, so it's more of an acting perspective on the character. Do you think that's a big difference?
You know, they wrote Freddie this cruel, kind of jokey dialogue, even in the original. So I just took that on, and in between scenes where I would be able to crack a joke or say something very cruel, in between that, I let it manifest itself in my physicality. And I realized early on in the first one, we're in a nightmare. We're always in a nightmare. Nightmare is not real, it's in the imagination. Freddie is not out in the hall smoking a cigarette, waiting to scare you or to gut you with his claw. Freddie is in the subconscious imagination because you've heard about him, you know about him, you've heard a rumor about him in the locker room or at a sleepover with your friends or in this walking to school. You've heard about him, and once you've heard about him, that's his key into getting into your subconscious, and when you fall asleep, he can haunt you. So I realized he's in this stylized place. All of our dreams are very stylized, even our stress dreams. And I realized Freddie's operating from that world, and that world's not real. It's surrealistic, it's different, it's stylized. So I moved myself a little differently. And I don't want to say I danced him, but I always put him in the frame that we were shooting that was not real, that was a room full of dolls and blood dripping down the walls. That was somebody's nightmare. And there's an old saying in the theater about wearing the furniture. And actors that do this while they act on stage are wearing the furniture. It's just a saying that we use. But I did it intentionally in Nightmare on Elm Street, a door frame. I would pose myself in there to paint myself into this non-real surrealistic landscape of the imagination.
Wow. Okay.